how does one YouTube? How does one YouTube? I It's been about a year, a little over a year since I last posted like a full-length video on the channel. The last video that I posted was my 2021 recap video. I plan on doing one for 2022, just never got around to planning it and just frankly just was too lazy to film it. Today obviously I will be sharing my testimony and it's gonna be good. It's gonna be a lot of crazy things that a lot of people don't really know about me. Majority of people don't even know like my full testimony. This is the first time that anyone's gonna really see and hear it in like full completion. I mean, I guess not see because these things are in the past, so if you weren't there you didn't get a chance to experience it. But I'm just excited for what this video has in store. I'm excited, nervous. It's literally laying everything out on the line, laying everything out there. One thing about me is that I'm not like someone who's afraid to be vulnerable. So without further ado, I do want to say there's gonna be like time markers. I'm not sure if I'm gonna leave the timestamps in the description or the way that YouTube like has it set up for timestamps, but there's gonna be some timestamps to some degree. So my life before, both my parents have been so great to raise us to knowing about God. My dad was really adamant about taking us to church every Sunday, and we just knew about God and like the Christian faith. I don't even remember the first time that we attended church, so I guess that's a good thing. I can't really exactly pinpoint exactly when this moment happened, but I know that it was when I was a kid. Sometimes God brings it back to my remembrance, or like I have dreams about it, but I remember when I was 8, there was like a moment of worship at during kids church, during kids service, and I just remember just having my eyes closed, and I think that was the first time like I actually like raised my hands in worship, and that's when I gave my life to God, not fully knowing like what it meant to be a Christian. And that's not like a criteria that you need to have in order to have salvation, to receive salvation. Like you're not going to know everything about the Bible, you're not going to know everything about God, and I think people think that's like a prerequisite for becoming a Christian, is that you have to know everything. I didn't really understand the gospel. So from the time that I was about 8 to 10 years old, I remember just going around school. I was a very, very quiet kid, to the point where people literally thought I was mute. So I didn't really speak, but the way that I communicated, like people knew I went to church. I was considered like the Christian kid way, but I would get teased for like going to church and things like that. I remember having like this church crush who actually went to the same elementary school that I did, so I was so excited that he and I were in church together. I don't know if he like even follows me or like watches any of my stuff, so I don't know if he'll even know if I'm talking about him. But so I would see him 5 days a week at school, and then I would be so excited when I saw him at church. But he was probably the only person that I really knew that like truthfully was a Christian at my school or like in my class, because he and I just happened to go to the same church. By the time I was 10 years old, almost close, a couple of months I think before my 11th birthday, my parents told us that they were getting divorced, and this was a really hard time on my family, but also for me, and it really affected like how I saw relationships and contributed to the trauma that I experienced growing up. I think was one of the turning points in my faith, in my experience, because we would always go to church as a family. My parents both served at the church that we were a part of, and my dad was just very religious during that time, and he just really was the spiritual leader. So once my parents got divorced, I just saw kind of the disconnect in who they were as people, and it made me, because I attached my faith to my parents' relationship, it made me kind of question whether or not I should continue to believe in the things that I believed in. When I was 12 years old, my dad had me get enrolled in a purity class at my church. And this was like the summer before I was in like health class, where we actually learned about like sex education. I had a general idea of what sex was and stuff like that, but I never really got the birds and the bees talk from my family. It's just something that I learned just from generalizing and figuring out on my own. Like, the world had to teach me what sex was. The only thing that I got from my parents growing up was that just don't have sex before marriage. And so then my dad put me in this purity class, and I was learning a lot of interesting things. I was the youngest one in this class. I think the age range was from like 12 to like 17. So I was the youngest one in the class, and literally everyone had like some kind of sexual experience except for me. And so they were just going like heavy in detail about their experiences and things like that. And this was at my church, so it was just really interesting to learn about this kind of stuff and just like have no idea how to really react. It was kind of traumatizing as well, and people just kind of patting me on the back in a way, like, oh good, you're like waiting till marriage and stuff like that. That way, it's just this constant pressure of like, don't do this until marriage. Teaching your children about sex is not a bad thing, because sex in itself is not inherently bad, but taking it outside of the environment that God created it for is what makes it sinful. It would have helped me, and I'll go in detail about it later in my testimony, but I feel like personally it would have helped me if I had more knowledge about it from my family and from the church, from a healthy standpoint, so that I understand like, hey, this is why God is protecting you from this and saving it for marriage, because he's not saying no, he's saying not yet, and he wants to protect you because he loves you. And I didn't get that perspective until later on. But anyway, went through this program, got a whole purity ring. We had to wear like the whole white dresses, do the whole ceremony. I barely remember it, but I do remember like getting so excited to pick out my white dress and like being the bride of Christ and all this other stuff, and like getting a ring and stuff like that. And I would just show it off at like school and stuff like that. And I remember a month later, and I will also say, I don't know why I didn't preface by saying this, but at this age, when I was taking this purity class at my church, I still thought cooties was a thing. So like, I was not even thinking about like guys in that way. But about a month after doing this program, I actually lost that purity ring, and then hormones started to kick in. I remember I was struggling so heavily with depression and suicidal thoughts. I was physically harming myself and hurting myself because that's what I thought that I deserved. I thought that I deserved to be hurt. So I was the one that was hurting me. Like, if other people were on the outside hurting me emotionally, then I thought that that's what I deserved. So I was taking the initiative of physically harming myself. And that's what a lot of mindsets that a lot of teenagers have nowadays too, especially with social media. They feel like they're not pretty enough and they have to fit all these societal standards, and they're really harming themselves because they feel like they'll never live up to these like fake false standards that society has created them to lie with. And it's really hard, and we really need to come to a place of understanding, like, even though we're not, as adults, we're not where they are, even if we can't fully understand what it is that they're facing, just being a shoulder for them to lean on and helping them process their emotions, because something as simple as that could save someone's life. And I remember the first person that I told about my physical harm was a guy that I was interested in my freshman year of high school. But the thing was that I did not expect him to do, literally the day after I told him a night before school, and the day after, he went to our guidance counselor and he told the guidance counselor what was going on. And for a very long time, I resented him, and I did not want to forgive him for going to tell our guidance counselor what I was dealing with. But because I'm so grateful that he did that, because I think I would have been in a worse off place if he had not told our guidance counselor what was going on. I remember, I think this was right before my mom got remarried. There was a time where I was just at my lowest point, and I was really going to take my life at that night. This was after the counseling. This was after a period of me like seeming like everything was okay. I was like, if I'm really okay, why am I going back to feeling like I'm not okay? And I was just like, you know what? It hit me hard, 10 times harder than it did in the past. And I was just like, you know what? I'm taking my life today. And I remember just sitting on the floor, knife in hand. And then I remember God stopped me. And I didn't know it was God until years later, until about 3 years ago. I didn't really register it as like God. He stopped me, and I started getting images in my mind of everyone that I loved, my friends at the time, my family, people that really meant a lot to me at the time. One thing about me is that I don't like to do things selfishly. The only reason why I was really taking my life was because I really thought no one wanted me, so I was just trying to answer everyone's, like, be the solution to everyone's problem, which I thought was me. And take my life in that way. God knew that I didn't really desire to be selfish. He was like, you're being selfish by taking your life. These people love you, and their life would not be the same without you. And after my mom got remarried and we moved to Delaware, oh, Delaware, I still was constantly chasing relationships. I always just felt like I had to fill a void. I always felt like I had to be in a relationship and constantly fill whatever emptiness I was feeling inside of myself through that. I think I was just lacking love in that way, and I just wanted to feel loved. And so I would just be in relationships that I had no business in being in. I would not heal from a previous relationship. The longest I had been out of a relationship was about 8 months, and during that time was when we had actually moved to Delaware, and I was getting used to like the school and the environment that I was in. And so from like 15 all the way to 24, the longest I had been without a relationship was 8 months. There was a time where I also dabbled in witchcraft, which I'm not exactly so excited to admit that I did, but it was something that I dabbled in, not just during this like teenage time period, but also later on in life. But as a teenager, I had this friend. I still claimed myself as a Christian, even though I wasn't living like it. I was definitely very worldly, very lukewarm. I told her how I was a Christian, and she told me that she was a Wiccan, or however you say that. I don't want to be disrespectful about that. But she told me that she pretty much was a witch, and she practiced witchcraft, and like they would do spells and conjure things, and they actually had like similar gatherings like they do like at church and stuff like that. And I just found it so fascinating. The supernatural world has always been fascinating to me. She was just telling me about it and just telling me different things. So then I was like, okay, I'm gonna convert to become a witch. Why I thought it was fun, at one point I also signed up for this like website, very demonic. It was very demonic. I signed up for this website because I was just curious on like learning more about like this area of things, and I just wanted to be part of the community of people that like dabbled in this stuff. And I think I was probably only on that website for like a couple of days. So very interesting time. Continued to lose myself in relationships, lost my virginity in college. I also went through a time period as like college is an interesting time. It's an interesting time. So things happened, but there was a time point where I was questioning my sexuality, questioning what I believed in as a Christian, still claiming to the title of a Christian, but still lived very worldly. So the last relationship that I was in actually started because I had ended a relationship probably like 3 weeks before, and I was in a relationship with someone for a year, and we were talking about getting married and things like that, and then it ended just because the relationship was just not healthy. And then immediately 3 weeks later I get on a dating app, and I ended up in a relationship with someone that I was with for 3.5 years, and we got engaged and all that fun stuff. He and I are on good terms now, but I had no business being in that relationship. But that relationship taught me a lot, and I'm so grateful for that relationship that I had, because he's an amazing person and he taught me a lot. And that was like one of the most transformative relationships that I've been, especially as an adult. But once that relationship ended, I ended it. But I was praying about this relationship, still not really having a relationship with God at this point. And I was just like, God, if this isn't something that you want me to be in, please show me. And After that prayer, things started getting really hard. The tension in our relationship started to really increase. He's an amazing person, he's an amazing guy, but he wasn't who God had for me, and God showed that by how hard things were really getting and how we just weren't on the same page. Our values weren't lining up in the same way anymore. And so I ended that relationship 3 years ago. Actually, it's been 3 years since that relationship ended, so I've been single that entire time. But a couple months later, I enrolled in this self-love course. May of 2020, I'm 24 years old at this, enrolled in a self-love course, and it was a 3-month, but I only stuck around for like a month and a half, and I will get into why. But I learned so much in that time that I really was part of the community, and taking the lessons and doing the homework, I really put in the work to understand where I was coming from, like the hurt that I was operating from when I was going into relationships, and it taught me so much about myself. Would I recommend it now? No, but God still used that to expose certain things about myself that I realized, like how I was showing up in relationships to contribute to these patterns that I continue to find myself in, which is another reason why I've been single for 3 years, because I've taken this really seriously, and God's really worked on my heart and unpacked a lot of that. But again, at this point, I was not walking with God yet, but God used that opportunity to show me. But I would not recommend it now, because there's a lot of like breathing techniques and like meditations and a lot of like spiritual stuff that isn't Christ-like. And this was also a time that I opened myself up to trying manifestation, because everyone was locked in. TikTok, I saw a lot of like law of attraction, TikTok, manifestation, all this new age stuff. So I literally dabbled in all of it except like buying crystals and stuff. But I dabbled into manifestation. I would go to sleep with like these like affirmations to make myself feel better. I would do the breathing techniques, I would do the meditations, and for a period of time, like the meditations and stuff made me feel this false peace, but it wasn't sustainable, because I would get to a low point and I was like, okay, I gotta go harder. I gotta do like 10 meditations a day in order for me to like get to this like place of like ascension or whatever verbiage they use. But whenever I would do law of attraction or manifestation, I would get so frustrated because it wouldn't work. It was just tiring. And I remember making videos about it, and I'm just like, no. Why did we do that? Then the George Floyd thing happened, and I was just so tired of feeling isolated, and then I got to another really low point. June of 2020, I was on the verge again of ending my life. But no one knew that I was going through this. No one knew. Not even the people I was living with. Like, no one had any idea that I was struggling. And everything was just weighing on me. And I just felt so heavy. So heavy. I started scrolling on TikTok, as one does sometimes. TikTok, social media has definitely been a vice in the past for me, and just kind of like distracting myself from what I was feeling. And I started seeing my For You page started becoming Christian TikTok. But I want to say it was a David Ladding video, but I remember just really hearing the gospel for the first time, and I felt God's presence, and he was like, this is what I have for you. You've been running from me for so long, and I just want you to come home. I never knew that you could actually have a relationship with God. The whole time I've been missing the most important aspect of being a Christian, which is having a personal, intimate relationship with Jesus. And I've grown so much in ministry and leadership and just knowing about God, and just been doing this relationship and this life with God for almost 3 years now, and my life looks so different. Like, I've grown and matured so much more in the past 3 years than I have in the entirety of the 27 years that I've been walking this earth. And that just shows how transformative God's love is. Even though I got saved when I was 8, I was still living in rebellion of God. I was running the complete opposite way. You saw the fall of like my walk with God, but it also came from not understanding that you can do life with God. Like, God just doesn't just hang up there looking over at the earth. He's not just sitting in heaven just watching everything play out. Like, no, he wants to do life with us. He's an active God. He wants to do things with us. He wants relationship with us. 2 Corinthians 21:22 says, "It is God who enables us along with you to stand firm for Christ. He has commissioned us and he has identified us as his own by placing the Holy Spirit in our hearts as the first installment that guarantees everything he has promised us."